Good afternoon and welcome to my Facebook Live. My name is Michelle and I'm from New South Wales, Australia, and I'm an independent demonstrator with Stamping Up. So let me just very quickly find us on our tablet, then we can get started. So won't be one moment. Okay, here I've got us. So let me just pop that up there so we can keep track of who's visiting. Excuse me. Okay, so as I said, my name is Michelle. Please jump on, say hello, let me know where you're from if you're visiting for the first time. Hi Shelley, how are you? Great to see you on. Okay, I'm going to flip this camera over and we're going to get started fairly quickly today. So bear with me 1 second and we'll just turn this over. So I hope you can all see that. Okay, the Celebration catalogue and the mini catalogue are now live, so you can order products from these catalogs. Hi Anita, thank you for joining us. Okay, but word of warning. Across the world at the moment we're having a little bit of, or quite a few issues with deliveries, and I know that we've seen them happening in other companies and it's happening with Stamping Up as well. So there are a lot of products in both the mini catalogue and the Celebration catalogue which we just don't have available at the moment. Hopefully within around about another week or so, around about the 19th, I think, if my memory serves me correct, we will have more products available. So with the Celebration, every time you spend $90, you can choose a product for free. Now, a lot of the $90 ones are the ones that aren't available at the moment, and there are some really, really lovely products in here. And yes, I can now show you inside this catalogue. So unfortunately, I have to say a few of these items here aren't quite available. I know the otters are available, and I know the simply marvelous or marbleless designer series paper are both available at the moment. So what I would recommend, if you don't want these or you've already got them, budget yourself to spend around about the $180 mark, because that will take you up to the next section, and that's when you spend $180, you get to buy a product like this one here, which is both the stamp set and the designer series paper in one bundle. So that one there is $180, and I know that there is another one up here, this one as well, for $180. So if you can afford to budget yourself up to that $180, you have got a couple of other products that you can choose. Unfortunately, there's no back orders or anything on this. It's as is. It's just the way the things are going around the world at the moment. Delivery is a little bit of an issue. Host a party at the moment, get $250 worth of sales, and you've got this lovely stamp set here that you could earn as well. If you're thinking of joining Stamping Up, if you join at the moment within this Celebration, our Celebration goes from now to the 28th of February. Okay, so you join up in my team for $169, and you get to choose 2 stamp sets of your choice to go into your kit. So really worthwhile savings there. So have a look at those. If you don't have these catalogues, please let me know, and if you're here in Australia, I can send the catalogues out to you. And also our mini catalogue, full of lots of wonderful product. I love this catalogue. I think I say it every year when they bring out their minis, is how wonderful it is, but I think they've outdone themselves yet again. And the product we're going to be looking at today is in this mini catalogue, and let me just pull it up here. I have marked the page, and we're going to be looking at this one here, and it's called In the Moment. Beautiful stamp set. You could either leave it in black and white or you can color it in, and what we're going to do today is we're going to do some watercoloring. And if any of you follow me personally on my personal Facebook page, you will know in the last few days I have been spending a little bit of time while I'm not sewing, just relaxing and doing some watercolor. So I thought today I would actually share with you how I've created this particular watercolor card. Watercolouring is something that I have always enjoyed, but I've had a reasonable amount of success with it. Not always. So there's a few little tips and tricks I'm going to share with you, I hope, as we go through. So for this project, what you do need is some shimmery white cardstock. Now, I always get my basic, whether it be my basic white cardstock or my shimmery white cardstock or any cardstock really that I'm using in smaller pieces, and I cut it into quarters. So I get my shimmery white or my basic white, and I will cut it down to 10.5 by 14.9 centimeters. It just gives me a nice size to work from, and then from there I can trim it down to the size I want in my finished project. So we're going to need 2 pieces of shimmery white cardstock, 1 piece for our front here and another piece for the inside. And as you can see, I've done a little bit of a water wash in there as well, and I'm really happy with the way that turned out, because that's something that I'm not overly successful with. So I'm really pleased with that. So what I've got here is 2 pieces of my shimmery white, and I've got them at 10.5 by 14.9. So as I said, that's like a quarter of a sheet. I've then got a piece of Melon Mambo, which is 10 by 5 centimeters, and that's going to be for this strip across here. I've also taken a piece of Designer Series paper. Now, this is out of a pack out of our annual catalogue. It's a part of the Hostess Rewards Designer Series paper, and it's quite a huge pack, and you get a lot of paper in it. I just can't remember at the moment what it's called or how much there's in it. I don't have my catalogue handy with me, but it is in towards at the very back of your catalogue, and one side has got a print on it and the other side is all black and white, and this is one of the black and white designs, and I just love this particular design in the cardstock. So this is also measuring, I've cut it to 10 by 14.4. And then we have our card base. So our card base is 10.5 centimeters by 29.9, and I'm using the Misty Moonlight. Really love this colour. It's one of our colours that will be leaving us this year. So I want to get in and use it as much as possible, because it is a beautiful colour. So I'm going to pop all those to one side for the moment. So here's our stamp set that we're in the moment that we're going to be using, and we're going to be using this image here and the sentiment. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is relax, and I find watercolouring so relaxing, so I thought that was very, very appropriate for what we're doing. You'll also need some water painters. Now, these are the water painters that Stampin' Up! Have got in their catalogue. They've got a pack here, and it comes with 3 different water painters inside, and I think my memory serves me correct, it's around about $21 for the pack. They've got water barrels on the end of it where you can add your water. I find these are probably a little bit hard to squeeze to get the water running, but once it's going, it works quite well. And you've got a broad nib, a medium nib, and a broad tip nib, a medium tip nib, and then a fine point tip nib. So this is how it comes. And when to get to your water barrel to fill it, you actually twist it the opposite direction. So if you hold your barrel and then turn your top part, and you turn it the opposite way to what you would normally think, and you can just fill your barrel there. I usually keep one of these on hand. It's an item that hairdressers use, and it's got a fine tip there, and I can just pop that in there and just fill that up as I need it. So and that just stays close by me at all times. Put that back on, and I usually just then screw the bottom part back on just like that. So you've got a nice fine tip. So you've got an area here which you can squeeze your barrel. You can see the water coming down. You need to give it quite a good squeeze, and as you can see there, your water is coming out. So you will need one of those. I do have my Old Faithful, which I really, really love, and I don't have to squeeze this quite as much. So I always keep that one on hand as well. But these are very, very good to have. You also need some paper towel. Always good to have some paper towel close by so you can clean your nib and to blot out some of your work as we're going along, and I'll show you that as we work on our card. So we've talked about that, we've talked about a paper towel. Now, because we're doing watercolor, we do need to use your StazOn ink. Okay, it's a permanent ink and it's an alcohol type based ink. It's solvent ink. So we're going to use StazOn. If you use Memento, you will find that that will bleed. So StazOn is the one to go. Another good thing about using shimmery white cardstock, and I'm using shimmery white rather than basic white, is shimmery white cardstock and your watercolor paper are very good with water. If you use your basic white, it will, and you put too much water on there, it will tend to peel or pill. And make little balls, and you don't want to do all that work to have it all ruined by using too much water. So your shimmery white will withstand the water that we're going to be using, and I actually find this is probably my favorite medium to use. There's lots of colors that we're going to be using today, so these are, whoops, just let me stand my tablet up again, sorry. Lots of colors we're using today, so I will list all these on my blog, but as you can see, I've picked quite a variety of colors. So I've got Misty Moonlight, I've got Petal Pink, Flirty Flamingo, Melon Mambo, Pale Papaya, Bumblebee, Soft Succulent, Evening Evergreen, Sahara Sand, Soft Suede, and Cinnamon Cider. So there's quite a few colours in that little drawing. So you don't need to work with as many, but I find I like to use some as my highlights. So that's why I have got so many there. So you don't need to, I mean, with watercolour it can be very, very basic, and you can make it as simple as you'd like. Hi Margaret, thank you for watching. Okay, so let's just pop one piece of that aside, and we're going to start by stamping our image. So I've got my StazOn. Now I liked with watercolour to give myself plenty of room to work, so it is quite a big piece of cardstock. Even though it's a quarter of a sheet, you could cut it down to a bit smaller if you want. We will be eventually cutting this down with a die from the Stitch So Sweetly dies. But I've just inked up my image there really, really well, and I'm going to pop that in the center there and just hold that down just for a few minutes, just letting that ink absorb into the cardstock. Now if you are a bit concerned about getting enough ink coverage, grab your Stamparatus and use that, because you can go back and ink up again a few different times, but that I'm quite happy with that. So pop my cover back on that and pop that away. I will clean that later on. Okay, so just let that dry for a couple of seconds, and the first color we're going to start off with is Misty Moonlight. So I'm going to do her jeans or her trousers in Misty Moonlight, and what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze this ink pad. Now I don't find there's a huge amount of give in this when we squeeze it, so basically I'm actually putting more pressure onto the back. I'm trying to get the ink pad to touch the lid on the inside. So I'm going to use the palm of my hand on the back of that and then squeeze down and squeeze the two together. Now if you're having issues with doing that, with whether you've got arthritis or anything in your hand, you can also grab one of our blocks and put some ink on a block, and that will work exactly the same way. So I'm just going to pop that out of the road for the moment. So I've got my ink transferred into my lid, and now I'm just going to use my aqua painter, and I'm just going to add a little bit of water. Now I don't want to add too much, just want to make this ink a little more fluid. Now the one thing you do have to learn to do when you're doing watercoloring, and this is something that it's taken me a long time to do, because I tend to be someone who is in a hurry to get everything done, and I want to have everything done quickly. But what you want to do is every time you do a layer of watercolouring, you want to let it dry. And don't be overly fussed about getting into all those areas. It is okay to leave some white space, and I think it does tend to look a little bit more like you've been doing watercolouring when you have. So don't be, you know, you can see there, I'll just bring this up closer so you can see, but you know, I've left a little bit of white space. I'm not going to go back and overcolour that. I like to leave a little bit of light, that shading, that light and dark. So as you can see, I've just done a very light layer of colour there, and I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to get my paper towel here and just clean off my brush. Now, you can have 2 or 3 different ink pads working all together at the one time, because while you're waiting for that to dry, you could start with the next one. So what I'm going to grab now is I'm going to grab my Flirty Flamingo. Again, do the same thing. Just give that a good squeeze. Add some colour into there. And this time I'm going to colour the blanket that's wrapped around her. And then hopefully by the time that's done, again, I can come back and work on the pants. So again, I'm just adding a bit of colour. I'm just really just going over it quite quickly. I'm not necessarily trying to get to all my edges. I'm just wanting to add some colour into there. And this is just going to be an undercolour, because we're going to go on over the top of this with the Melon Mambo and add some highlights. I'm going to get around his legs and down the side of her, just there. So we're just sort of adding a little bit of colour, and as you can see, all I've done is just add a wash of colour. I'm keeping it fairly light. Make sure you clean off your brush really well in between going from colour to colour. Okay, now I'm going to come back, grab a little bit more colour, so a little bit less water, and I'm just going to go back in here and add now some highlights. And I'm just letting the brush really, I'm working more on the side of my brush rather than the tip, and I'm just adding some colour into here. Now if you find that you've got too much water or too much darkness like I've got there, you can either come back in and add a bit more there. You can add a bit more water and use your paper towel and blot it. You could even clean your brush, get it as clean as you possibly can. Just getting some water down. I'm going to add a bit more water into here where I've already coloured. And I'm going to come back in with my paper towel and blot it away. And also by just even adding the water there is removing some of that colour. I don't want to add too much. I want to just see if I can blend that in a little bit there. And just start coming in and adding some highlights. As I said, don't be afraid of blotting some of that out. Blotting it can remove most of your colour if you and take it back to a very, very pale colour if you're doing it very quickly while your ink is still very wet. And I've done that quite a few times to come back. I've not been overly happy with the amount, but the longer you leave it sitting, the more it's going to absorb, and you're going to be less likely to blot out. So I'm going to let that dry a bit now. You can always get your heat gun at it too and dry it off with your heat gun. But I find with just using my heat gun, sometimes I can curl my paper a little bit. So by doing it and just letting it naturally dry, it keeps that paper nice and flat. So I'm just going to come in and just add some more highlights. Now, depending on how pedantic you want to be, as to how long this is all going to take. As you can see, I'm not sort of being too overly worried. Now I'm only using the Flirty Flamingo just to give me a little bit of a light colour. I want to come back in with some Melon Mambo and just add a few more highlights or a little bit of depth of colour in that blanket. So I'm just going to water this down a little bit. And then I'm just going to come in and just add a little bit more, just working on that side of my brush, blotting it out just to get that blend in a little bit. And you can add as much colour as you want. I'm going to add a bit more water into that, just blot that out a little bit because it's a little bit dark. Just remember you want to add a little bit of shading. So don't be afraid to turn your work around. Let me just get rid of that so you can see what you're doing. You are losing here a little bit of that the Flirty Flamingo colour. That's okay because I just wanted to have that and add the Mellow Mambo as more of a highlight of the colour, because blankets aren't usually generally all one colour. Now you have a little bit of a secondary colour coming through. And I'm going to leave that for the moment just to let that dry, because it will change again once it starts to dry. So I might just come back and add a bit more of this, and I just want to add just a little bit. Now I've got quite a dry brush here, and I'm just adding in some shading. Let's get in there next to the I'm not being overly fussy there. I'm just adding a little bit there to bring some depth of colour in there. Just take that. Okay, so once you're quite happy with that, you can close that up and start working with your next colour. So I'm going to take my soft succulent now, and we're going to do the blanket that she's sitting on in soft succulent. Just getting a bit of water into this. Again, I just want to put it down a light colour. Just like a bit of a wash. Because too, when you're laying sort of like a wash or a bit of a even clear water, your ink is going to flow better in those areas that are wet than in the drier areas. So now I'm just going to come back in and just add just a little bit more colour. I'm just got a little bit more strength in my ink, a bit less water on my brush, and again I'm just using that side of my brush. You can come in and use the tip of your brush when you want to get finer detail. Let's clean that off, and again I'm just going to let that dry a little bit and we head off to our next colour. So it can be quite quick working this way. And I'm going to use some cinnamon cider for our pup. Let me squeeze that again, get some ink in there. Now I've done him mostly in all cinnamon cider, but then later on I've come in the soft suede and added some dark colour. So I'm just going to add a bit of water to him and just do again a light wash over the top of him. Make sure you get those legs. And this is a good thing about letting one section dry before you go on to the next one. With the first one I didn't quite let her pants dry before I started working on the pup. And because they're so close together and one area was still wet, the brown was bleeding into the blue and the blue was bleeding into the brown. So by letting that sort of dry off a little bit, as I said before, your ink will blend in areas where there's already been or areas where it's already wet. So by removing or letting it dry, it's not going to bleed into those areas as much, if any. So just trying to get some more water down into the nib. That's it. And I'm just going to come in and start putting in some highlights. If you want to lighten a few areas, as I said, just blot it out. Here's a bit more colour. That's him for the moment. I'll come back in again later on with another colour and darken, add some highlights to him and give him a little bit more sort of another colour, so he's two-tone. Okay, so I'm going to grab my bumblebee and I'm just going to do this coffee mug here. You can follow the lines that Stampin' Up have given us in the stamp too as highlight areas. So if you're not sure where you want to highlight, if you have a look at some of the stamps, not so much with this one because this one is just generally a line stamp, but where, like in this blanket down the bottom, where you want to add extra highlight would be around those lines that they've added there to show that the blanket has got a few folds and everything in it. Now, Petal Pink we're going to use for her face and hand. Just want to use just a little bit here. We don't want to have too much, just want to take a little bit of colour in there. And again on her hands. That's all that is, just a tiny little bit of colour. I like to test my nib on my hand just to make sure it is damp. And I'm going to use some Evening Evergreen for the books. Again, I'm going to add a fair bit of water into this. Hi Martez, how are you? Thank you for joining us today. And we're just going to add, again, just working on that side. Now I'm not taking that colour all the way to the edge. I'm just adding a little bit of what, leaving a bit of white space. It is okay to have white space in watercolouring, and you don't need to have all straight lines too, so you can sort of take out, okay, just give that a bit of a blot. So I'd rather have my lines looking a little bit curved than straight. Now I'm just going to come in and add a bit extra colour down the spine, and then in areas where I think might be needing a bit of shading. So you want to put a bit of shading down here where her book is going behind her. And I'm just going to blot a little bit of that away. Just see if I can take out a bit of that, soften that area a little bit. Take off that harshness. Okay, now what you can do if you wanted to, because the Evening Evergreen works really well with that soft succulent, is go into here and you can add a few highlights in around here. Just showing some darkness where the folds are. Got my fingernail into some ink there, so let's just wipe that off. Now I really love the Stampin' Up ink pads for doing this because they're water-based, does allow you to do so much with them. Okay, so Pale Papaya. I'm going to do the pillows or cushions behind her. Again, adding some water into this just to give soft. We don't want too much colour in those because we've got a lot of colour elsewhere. Again, it's just to add a bit of a wash there, and go in and add a few more depths of colour in there if you want to. Bit of shading around her. Left some white space. Now you can always let this dry, then come back to it at a later date and add more colour, or and keep working on it a little bit. It is forgiving that way. Now Sahara Sand I'm going to use for her socks. Okay, I just want to give that a squeeze to get some water coming down. Yes, very slowly working its way down. Add some water to that, just to use as a palette. And we're just going to add a wash of colour on there. You can come in and add a bit more. Now I am working on this pretty quickly, so I probably would normally leave this to dry a little bit. It's been a hard lesson to learn to do that, but it does make a big difference. Now I'm just going to come in with my other this one does work a little bit quicker, and I just want to see if I can remove some of this colour in here. So I'm just adding some water on there, quite a bit of water really, and I'm just going to see if I can just soften that a little bit more. Soften that one. Yep, I think that's looking a little bit better. As you can see, it is so much simpler to blot out some of that colour. Now all we have left to do is add some colour to her hair. And again, we're just sort of adding just a little bit of colour in there. Oops, just got, not quite sure where that came from. That's okay. And I'm just going to add a little bit of brown just there. And then we're going to add a little bit to the puppy. Just again, just to add a little bit of, get rid of some of that. That's a little bit too dark. A bit more shading in him. So I'm just going to blot that out a little bit. Maybe a bit of colour to his ears. And I'm just going to put a little bit of this in this coffee mug just to add a bit of, just spreading that colour out a little bit and just giving that a bit of a blot. Okay, so there you are. I'm pretty happy with that, except for one little mark that's ended up on there, but I'm not going to overly worry about that too much. So let me just move all these out of the road. So I don't know where that mark came from, so I'm just going to get a soft rubber. Now I'm just going to clean this off a little bit to see if this is something that's going to move. No, doesn't look like it is. Somehow I've dropped, it looks like a little fine line of ink or something, but that's fine. As I said, I'm not going to worry too much about that. So you can come in if you want to, and just, if you're a bit concerned about the depth of the colour in some of this, to take a bit of that out. Find a bit of clean paper towel and just give that a nice blot, and that will remove some of that colour. Let that dry, and I'm just going to hit this very quickly with my heat gun, but normally I would let that dry completely, just naturally. Don't want to add too much heat because it can warp your paper a bit. As you can see there, that has actually got a little bit of warpingness to it now. You can pop a large block on top, like one of these, and just let that cool down like that. That will tend to help it a little bit, but I'm just going to keep working here. Let me just pop that away again. Okay, so now we're going to cut this down. I'm using the largest scalloped rectangle with the from the Stitch So Sweetly. Now I do need to cut this down a bit because it does need to go through my mini, I'm using my mini cut and emboss at the moment. So I'm just going to grab this and just want to take a little bit off the sides, not too much, but it's around about 3.5 centimeters, and that should still work quite well. So we're just going to remove those. So that's now narrow enough to go through my mini one. You wouldn't have to worry about that so much if you're using the larger one. Now all these products that I'm using today you can purchase from my online store, and you'll find a link to that above the in the description. I will have the links to this and to all the products I'm using on my blog as well, but I probably won't get around to blogging this till either later today or sometime over the weekend. So I'm going to line that up in there the way I want it, and then pop that on top and wind that through. Love this little mini machine because it is so handy and so simple to use. And I love the way it's Stampin' Up! And now making a lot of dies small enough that we can actually run it through the mini one. So there you go. So we've cut that down. Just move all that out of the road so everything doesn't get damaged. Pop that up there. So let's bring in the rest of our, we've got one more thing to watercolour, and that's the ink card insert. Can't forget that. Now I'm going to actually use my Old Faithful water brush for this because I do want a lot of water, and the colours that I'm going to be using are Flirty Flamingo, Soft Succulent, and Misty Moonlight. And I'm going to start, I like to always start with my lightest colours, so I'm going to start off with the Flirty Flamingo. Pop that out of the road, and we're just doing this section here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay quite a bit of water, not too much, but just have got a fair bit there. Just make sure that it's only in the areas I want, and I'm just going to water this down and just add a wash. Now this piece of paper cardstock does need to get cut down a bit yet, so I'm not overly worried, and I'm going to actually blot some of that out. So I've let that sit for a little bit, so we've got some light and dark on there. To add a little bit more colour. So this will get trimmed down, as I was saying before. So I'm going to just blot some of that. The blotting just takes away some of the colour, but also helps it to dry quicker. We can always come back and add a bit more of this if we need to. Clean off my brush again. Yeah, so we're going to trim this down to the size we want. So if your edges don't look quite tidy, don't worry, we can trim that down. So now I've got my soft succulent. I'm going to add a bit of colour in that. I'm just going to add a little bit of colour over the top. Come back in and blot some of that out if you want. A little bit more stronger colour of that in there. Maybe blot a bit of that out. Now our Misty Moonlight. Again, we're going to do the same thing. Start with a lighter wash. So I'm going to just blot some of that. Now, because I haven't let these colours all dry completely, they are sort of tending to bleed or colour up, mix together a little bit. Just got to be very careful with that you don't get too muddy. It's just that I'm trying to work with this sort of fairly quickly for you. And that's another reason why you don't want to use too many colours doing this sort of thing, because you'll end up with like mud tones. I'm quite happy with the amount of pink I've got in there. I just want to add a bit more of the green. And that's fine, because I don't want to make it too wet, because I do want to stamp over the top of that. Again, as I said before, you can hit that with your heat gun. Make sure I clean my nib, my brush. Okay, give that a bit of a dry. I might just hit that with my heat gun, because I think it's probably going to be quite wet. And also too, if you let it dry, then it's going to cut better when we trim it. But I also didn't want to put too much heat on there, because I don't want that to buckle, which it is doing a little bit. So let me just set that aside, and we'll get back to this. So we need to have our card base. So as I said, I've cut this at 10.5 by 29.9, and I've scored it at 14.9, and we're just going to fold that in half. And you can use your bone folder here just to burnish that fold so it stays nice for you. Now, designer series paper, I've cut it 10 by 14.4, so we can adhere this to the front of our card. So over the next week or so, the watercolouring that I've been doing over the last few days, I will start posting on my blog, so you go there and have a look. I'll probably space it out over the next couple of weeks, because some of them I still haven't made into a card. I've just been sort of been going to the pool in the morning and then coming home from the pool and sort of resting a bit, and doing a bit of relaxation by doing some watercolouring. So this piece is 10 by 5 centimetres, and it's not quite halfway. Well, it's sort of more than, like, it's in the top half. So halfway is probably around about here, and this is up on the higher end of halfway. So we've got those two adhered together. Just move that around a little bit, so then that layer underneath is all covered. That's the good thing about using multi-purpose glue. You do have a bit of time there to play. So there's that one and that one. Let's have a look and see how this is going for drying. Yes, that's fairly good. So I'm just going to bring my trimmer in, and we're going to cut this down to 10 centimetres. By 14.4. Once we've done that, we can stamp our sentiment on the inside or on that piece, because this is going to be our card insert. I'm just going to line this up with the grid paper, and then line this up there on the watercolour. Stamp straight down, don't rock it, and then straight back up. So that looks great. So now we can add this to the inside of our card. Now with watercolouring, don't think that I've just sort of done this overnight. I've spent a couple of years practicing, and just practicing all the time. Whenever Stampin' Up! Have brought out a line type design, I've sort of stamped it off on some shimmery white, and I've practiced, and some of them work and I've used on cards, some of them haven't, and they've gone in the bin. So it's a matter of just practicing your techniques. It's not something that you're going to get straight away. It may take you a little while to be confident enough. And just even the wash that I've done here, it's probably the best I've ever done, in the fact that I'm usually pretty hesitant in doing that sort of wash, but I was really pleased with the way, and I think it's just the way it worked. And I think a lot of it is too having good tools, having good brushes. Even this one here, which is quite an old one, it's my old favorite because the water does flow through it quite quickly. This one here, I find I've got to struggle a little bit more. You can still get the water flowing, it still works just as well. You've even got the broader nibs. You can use the broader nibs one to give you more of a wash. It's finding your tools that you're happy with and that work really, really well. And then practice. Just practice. It's not going to be something that's going to come overnight for a lot of people, and definitely me. Now with this card here, my first card, I actually wrapped some white baker's twine around it. And then after I did that, I was actually having a look, because blankets are soft and chenille, well, mine is. And this is one of the ribbons that comes with the, what bundle did that come with? The one with the leaves. Where is it? Artfully Composed. So it's in this bundle here. So it's a 1.9 centimetre wide frayed ribbon, and it's quite a soft ribbon. But what I found with this ribbon is very, very easy to pull it apart. and you're left with this really nice chenille type thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull, that'll be enough there. I'll grab my scissors. Now, it may not tie as well in as a bow, so we're just going to have a look and see how this works. And we're just going to hold that on there and wrap that around a few times. I might give myself a bit more of a tail, because if I can tie a bow, I will. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just using my scallops as where I'm going to wrap it. So I'm just going to give that a wrap with the cotton baker's twine. The cotton baker's twine, I probably only wrapped that around twice. This time I've wrapped it around about 3 or 4 times. Okay, let's see. Now I like to tie my bows upside down. Probably is a little bit fiddlier because it is a finer thread. So be careful because you can't sort of see where your bow is and where your ties are, unlike the baker's twine. Whoops, pulling the wrong one. Let's see if it happens if I pull that one. Which one am I getting? Oh, I want to make that one smaller. There we go. Quite sure. I think I like the baker's twine. But I mean, it's just something I'm going to have to play with, because I think it just gives you a really nice chenille sort of look. But bows probably aren't the best thing to tie with that. So we'll just go back to our baker's twine. Always worthwhile having a try and having a play. And we're going to wrap this around just twice. Give yourself a generous tail. You don't want to cut yourself too short. Turn that upside down. Find when you tie your bows upside down, you sort of have your tails and your bow part in the right, more in the right spot, sort of facing the right direction. Then if you tie it up the right way. Oops, this doesn't want to. Sometimes these just go together really well and you can tie a bow really easy. Baker's twine is fairly forgiving. You can actually pull it around fairly easily. Don't want to get that twist in it too much. If your bow doesn't quite look good, you can always put a little glue dot underneath to hold it into place. Now I'm going to cut my tails off after I've put this on. So I'm just going to use some dimensionals. I'm adding quite a few dimensionals on this because I don't really want it to sag in the middle. I want it to hold up in postage. So I hope you're all having a nice day. It's been a funny day here. We've had lots of rain yesterday and last night and off and on today. But, okay, so make sure I've got my card the right way. And then I'm going to position this. Now I'm lining up the blanket really within that melon mambo area. So once you're happy with that, gives you a bit of an idea of where you can cut your tails. Probably need a sharper pair of scissors than the one I'm using. But there you go. So I haven't put a sentiment on that because on the front of it, because I really think the sentiment inside is enough. And you've still got plenty of room there to write a little note. And I know my mum hasn't been feeling the best over the last couple of weeks, so one of these is going to go to her. So I hope you've enjoyed that today, and I hope you have a bit of a go at doing some watercolouring. It's not hard, as I said, just got to practice. Let it dry in between each layer, and don't try to do everything all at once. Even if you've got to walk away from it for a little bit, you can always come back and add a little bit more later on. So I'll put all the details and everything I will put on my blog, and this will be uploaded to my YouTube channel, so you can always go back and watch it again at a later date. Now let me just flip my camera over. Won't be one moment. Thank you, Anita. I'm glad you liked it. Okay. So, as I said, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you can join me again next Friday as we'll look at some more products, probably from the new mini catalogue. As I said before, if you don't have a mini catalogue, you don't have a demonstrator, please contact me and I can get a catalogue out to you in the mail, or send you the download links if you want to just download it and look at it that way. But you will find it on my Stamping Up website, which is michelledutrissa.stampingup.net. If you scroll right down to the very bottom of that first page, you'll find the links to the PDF copies there. So, but if you want a hard copy, let me know and I'll get one out to you. But anyway, I'll see you next week. Have a lovely day. Enjoy your weekend. And bye for now. Bye.